Across cities and small towns, from coastal neighborhoods to inland barrios, an electric sense of release spreads through Venezuela as crowds gather in streets, plazas, and public squares. Music pours from open windows, flags wave from balconies, and people who have endured years of economic pain, migration, and political paralysis allow themselves a rare moment of collective joy. The reason for the celebration, as whispered and shouted from phones and radios alike, is the belief that a decisive geopolitical shift has occurred, that the external powers long seen as propping up Nicolás Maduro have finally stepped back, and that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have lost their grip over Caracas. Whether framed as fact, interpretation, or hopeful expectation, the moment is experienced by millions as a turning point, a symbolic break from a long chapter of dependency and isolation. For many Venezuelans, the story is less about distant leaders in Moscow or Beijing and more about the promise of change at home. Years of sanctions, mismanagement, and political stalemate have hollowed out daily life. Families learned to stretch scarce resources, professionals left in waves, and those who remained adapted to a grinding uncertainty. In that context, any sign that the pillars supporting the status quo are weakening feels monumental. People who once spoke in cautious tones now talk openly about elections that matter, institutions that might recover, and an economy that could breathe again. The celebrations are fueled by hope as much as by information, by the human need to believe that a long night is ending. The narrative that Putin and Xi have lost Maduro spreads rapidly because it fits a story many want to be true. For years, Russia and China were perceived as key international backers, offering diplomatic cover, loans, oil for debt arrangements, and symbolic solidarity. Their involvement was often portrayed by the government as proof that Venezuela was not isolated, that it had powerful friends who would resist pressure from Washington and Brussels. When rumors circulate that those relationships are cooling, being recalibrated, or no longer unconditional, the psychological impact inside Venezuela is enormous. It suggests that the old playbook may no longer work, that the balance of leverage is shifting. In the streets, the celebrations take on a layered meaning. Older generations remember earlier eras of prosperity and stability when oil wealth underwrote public services and a middle class flourished. Younger Venezuelans, many of whom have known little but crisis, experience the moment as a first taste of agency. Social media fills with videos of spontaneous dancing, car horns blaring in rhythmic unison, and handwritten signs declaring "Se puede" and "Libertad." These expressions are not coordinated by any single movement. They arise organically, reflecting a society that has learned to communicate hope through shared rituals when formal channels feel blocked. At the same time, there is an undercurrent of caution. Venezuelans have been disappointed before, and many understand that geopolitics rarely delivers clean victories. Russia and China are pragmatic actors, guided by interests rather than sentiment. A recalibration does not necessarily mean abandonment, and even reduced support does not automatically translate into immediate political change. Yet hope does not require certainty. It thrives in the cracks between what is known and what is possible. The idea that the international chessboard is shifting in ways that favor internal change is enough to animate the streets. The celebrations also reflect a broader regional and global context. Latin America has watched Venezuela's crisis with a mix of solidarity and frustration, absorbing millions of migrants while grappling with its own economic challenges. Any sign that Venezuela might stabilize resonates beyond its borders. The belief that external powers are reassessing their positions is interpreted as an opening for renewed diplomacy, for multilateral engagement that prioritizes humanitarian relief and political negotiation over zero-sum confrontation. In this sense, the joy in Caracas echoes in Bogotá, Lima, Miami, and Madrid, where Venezuelan communities follow developments with intense emotion. For supporters of the government, the moment is more complicated. Some dismiss the celebrations as premature or manipulated, arguing that alliances endure and that sovereignty is not dictated by foreign capitals.
Others, however, quietly acknowledge fatigue. Governing through perpetual crisis is exhausting, and even loyalists recognize the limits of relying on external patrons whose own priorities shift with global events. The idea that Russia and China might seek a lower-profile relationship, focusing on economic pragmatism rather than ideological alignment, forces a reckoning within the ruling coalition. Internationally, analysts debate what losing Maduro actually means. It could signify reduced financial exposure, fewer diplomatic interventions, or a willingness to support negotiated outcomes rather than unconditional backing. It could also reflect broader strategic recalculations as global powers juggle conflicts, trade disputes, and domestic pressures. For ordinary Venezuelans, these nuances matter less than the felt reality that the ground beneath their politics may be moving. In a country where perception often shapes outcomes as much as policy, the belief in momentum can itself become a force. The emotional release visible in the celebrations is rooted in accumulated grief. Years of shortages, blackouts, and hospital crises left scars that do not fade quickly. The pandemic compounded these wounds, exposing the fragility of systems already under strain. Against this backdrop, the notion that powerful external actors are stepping back from a rigid stance feels a validation of endurance. It suggests that suffering was not invisible, that persistence has finally altered the calculations of those far away. Yet even amid joy, many voices urge realism. Change, they argue, will be measured not in headlines, but in concrete improvements. Restored purchasing power, functioning schools, reliable electricity, and the safe return of families separated by migration. The celebrations are a beginning, not an end. They mark a psychological shift that could empower citizens to demand accountability and participation, but they do not substitute for the hard work of rebuilding institutions and trust. What makes this moment distinctive is the convergence of internal desire and external signals. Venezuelans have never lacked the will to improve their circumstances. What they often lacked was a sense that the international environment would allow for meaningful progress. The perception that Russia and China are no longer unwavering pillars of the existing order reframes possibilities. It opens space for dialogue that was previously dismissed as futile, for compromises that were politically unthinkable. As night falls, fireworks light up the sky in some neighborhoods, while in others the celebration is quieter, marked by shared meals and long conversations. People debate what comes next, weighing optimism against experience. Some plan to re-engage in civic activities they had abandoned. Others consider returning home from abroad if conditions truly improve. The idea of return is particularly powerful, touching on a collective longing to reverse the great dispersion that has defined recent years. The story spreading through Venezuela is, at its core, a story about agency. Whether or not Putin and Xi have definitively lost Maduro in any formal sense, the belief that external dominance is waning restores a measure of ownership to the Venezuelan people. It suggests that their future is not solely the product of deals struck in distant capitals, but something they can shape through participation, resilience, and unity. In the days that follow, the initial euphoria may give way to sober assessment. Markets will still fluctuate, negotiations will still stall and resume, and political actors will maneuver to protect their interests. But something intangible will have changed. Millions will remember the night they took to the streets, not out of desperation, but out of hope. That memory can sustain movements long after the music fades. Ultimately, the significance of the celebrations lies not in their accuracy as a geopolitical verdict, but in their emotional truth. They reveal a society hungry for signals that change is possible, eager to seize moments that affirm dignity and possibility. In that sense, the belief that powerful allies have stepped back from Maduro functions as a catalyst, transforming latent aspirations into visible action. The road ahead remains uncertain, and Venezuela's challenges are deep and structural. Yet moments like this matter. They remind the world that behind analyses and alliances are human lives waiting for reasons to celebrate something more enduring than survival. If the joy erupting across Venezuela marks the beginning of a new chapter, it will be because millions decided to believe, together, that their story